it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to share with colleagues some information about our Commonwealth Parliamentarians with Disabilities Network. So I am Clive Barker, I'm a Programmes Manager at the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, and I've coordinated this network since April 2020. Today, I'm going to go over with our audience an overview of the network, its missions, its history, structure, objectives, and what the deliverables are, the outputs that we currently have as a network, and what we share with our audience. So to give you a brief overview of the network, it was established in 2018. It's one of 3 networks that the CPA has, along with our small branches and Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians network. It sits on par with those 2 other networks that we have. And it was established in 2018 following our inaugural Conference of Parliamentarians with Disabilities, which took place in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and brought together around 30 to 40 parliamentarians with disabilities at that time. To give a bit of an overview of the mission and vision of the network, it has a mission statement that was established in its strategic plan in 2021, which is to encourage Commonwealth Parliaments to enable effective and full participation of persons with disabilities at all levels. For anyone that is unfamiliar with the CPA, we are an interparliamentary relations organisation comprised of 180 national and sub-national legislatures across the Commonwealth's democracies. In total, our membership is around 18,000 members. I mention this as at this stage, the network's mission does also feed into the general vision of the CPA. So we're primarily a learning and development organisation that, as you'll see under the vision, we promote knowledge of the constitutional, legislative, economic, social and cultural aspects of parliamentary democracy. That's our purpose, and through the Parliamentarians with Disabilities Network, we hope that we contribute towards that. On to the membership of the network. So any sitting legislator with a disability in a CPA member parliament is by their nature a member of the network. However, they're not just limited, our activities are not just limited to members with disabilities, we also engage with parliamentary staff, and you can see a bit of information there about the number of members that we have in our network. Obviously, as you will see, we've got 17,000 members across 180 legislatures. I mentioned there the figure of 60 members with disabilities from 25 legislatures. So those are just the members with disabilities that we're aware of, that we actively engage with on a regular basis. Of course, as I will go on to, disability can be interpreted in different ways in different jurisdictions. So that figure is just what we work with internally on how many members we engage with. We're a very inclusive network in that we're open to any other members that are out there, and we're quite aware that I'm sure that there's much more than 60 members out of 17,000 that there are. So I will just mention about the definition of disability that the network uses. It adopts the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities definition, which is persons who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So that's a holistic definition, and that's the definition that the network adopts for allowing persons who identify as living with a disability to, of course, engage with us and our other members within the network. In reference to the size of the network and its scope that I mentioned before. I will now just mention some of the milestones I briefly mentioned before, the 2018 Conference of Parliamentarians with Disabilities in Halifax, Nova Scotia. In the year subsequent to that, 2019, we had a Parliamentarians with Disabilities session at our 64th Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference, our annual conference, which took place in Kampala, Uganda that year. That brought together, again, was another opportunity to bring together members with disabilities from across the globe to network and interact and learn best practice from one another. Then in 2020, our headline output that year was we launched a set of disability inclusive communications guidelines that I will come on to later in this presentation. And then 2021, we established our Capital Investment Fund, and 2022, we've launched a online Parliamentary Academy course the Parliamentary Academy being a learning management system at the CPA, free to access for members. I will give a brief overview of the key stakeholders involved in the network. So we have our chairperson, Honourable Laura Kanushu, who's a member of the Parliament of Uganda and is a listed member representing persons with disabilities. We have our vice chairperson, which is Senator Paul Richards of the Senate of Trinidad and Tobago, who also represents our Caribbean region. I'm obviously mentioned there as the person who does the day-to-day running of the network. And then we have other regional champions, as we call them, who sit and represent each region of the CPA, encompassing all continents of the Commonwealth. So that is how the board represents the wider CPA membership. I mentioned our capital investment fund before, and this is something that I really want to concentrate on in this brief presentation. And this is a fund that we established in 2021. It's now at an amount of £60,000, and we direct this towards accessible initiatives taken by our parliaments. So I mentioned two of the priorities there: improving physical accessibility and the procurement of assistive technology. So this being a technology event, I'm sure that some of the audience might be familiar with assistive technologies. There's something that we also look to support parliaments in implementing within their institutions. I've provided a list here, a long list here of all of the examples of initiatives that we would be open to supporting. The fund hasn't supported all of these initiatives just yet. It's only had a couple of years being set up, but we hope to support parliaments with any of these different projects that they might wish to look into if they're a member of the CPA. And at this juncture, I wanted to mention technology and innovation again, as it's something that the CPA is concentrating on more and more. This year, for instance, we're supporting the Parliament of Montserrat in their establishment of online live proceedings, which will be broadcast to the population there. We look at this as another way of, as the Parliament has presented to us, how this will make their proceedings more accessible for persons with disabilities. Of course, persons with disabilities who aren't able to necessarily frequently, or even on one occasion, go to the Parliament physically. It provides that ability to still engage with its proceedings and democracy of the jurisdiction. I did also provide some case studies that I wanted to share with you all today. So there's two case studies in particular from last year's iteration of the fund. These are case studies from the Parliament of Jamaica, where the fund went towards making more accessible restrooms with the use of widened doorways, installation of automatic hands-free doors, motion-assisted light switches and door handles, and the installation of grab bars. So there's some pictures here to show you what changes have been made to the Parliament, the before and after, and how we've literally taken this fund and pushed it towards making the institution itself physically more accessible, and going beyond, or in collaboration with the more advocacy side of the network in putting tangible progress on the Parliament as an institution and its engagement with persons with disabilities. We also supported a accessibility audit undertaken by the Parliament in the Isle of Man, and this accessibility audit guided the institution on what physical adaptations were needed, and then on those adaptations that were needed and were identified, we then supported the Parliament in implementing those. So two examples of such would be a removable ramp for the main chamber, the House of Keys, which you can see on the screen now, and we also supported the installation of a power-assisted door and a lock for the accessible bathrooms that they have on the premises. So this was another example of a project that we supported for a Parliament in making their building more accessible. And we're supporting many other initiatives. There's 4 this year that we're supporting in making other parliaments around the Commonwealth more accessible. There are 2 other initiatives that I will mention, conscious that I've only got a few minutes left in this presentation, which are other outputs that I would mention are our online course. So I mentioned before our online learning management system, the Parliamentary Academy, and last year we launched a course called the Making Parliaments Accessible for Persons with Disabilities course. This is freely accessible, as with all of our courses on the Parliamentary Academy, for CPA parliamentarians and parliamentary staff. and it focused on accessible communication strategies, changing the perception of persons with disabilities within the institution, and international frameworks in guiding the Parliament's understanding of how persons with disabilities should be treated and how their rights can be upheld by the institution. And finally, just to mention also our publications. So under the auspices of the network, we've released previously publications. I mentioned our disability inclusive communications guidelines before. We've also released in recent years our mental health toolkit for Commonwealth Parliaments under the auspices of the network. These are really publications that we look to produce, handbooks, toolkits and guidelines that we release for our membership in making them, in guiding them in how they can make themselves more accessible to persons with disabilities and how they can engage their population that lives with disabilities. These are another output of the network that we've been undertaking for the last 3 to 4 years, really, and regularly producing copies of these documents. I'd be more than happy to share with the audience if anyone